Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the INTP stream. Um, Today, I wanted to talk about, something. Well, today I'm talking about political matters or a political matter. Um, Something relatively interesting, but I will leave you to be the judge of what you find interesting. Um, I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast with Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura is an ex-pro wrestler. He was an independent party governor of Minnesota. He's not a conspiracy theorist, but he entertains conspiracy theories and raises questions about the government's official stand on various events and issues. He's typically regarded by your FETE class of people as just a crazy conspiracy theorist because he's just written off as a conspiracy theorist crazy guy simply because he questions the official narrative being pushed by authorities. So he's actually a very sophisticated thinker in his own right and does kind of ask the right questions. And he was an independent candidate that actually won the election in Minnesota. He became the governor of Minnesota as an independent candidate, neither a Democrat nor a Republican. To any thinking person, it seems that there are tremendous issues with the ruling political class, the Democrats and the Republicans, and that our two-party system is inherently a bad thing. It reduces our democratic choice to essentially to a binary choice between only two options, right? So it really isn't true democracy anymore. It's it's not true democracy, and I think part of democracy is having a plenitude of options and candidates to draw on. And in some sense, the two-party system restricts democratic choice, I think. And so I guess I'm just one of these people that wants to break away with our current two-party system. And I dislike the Republicans for many reasons, and I dislike the Democrats for many reasons. And ultimately, all politicians seem to fall into the puppetry of um, not taking issue by issue positions on things, um, but rather simply taking positions that are politically palatable, enhance electability. They almost have the parties are not issue by issue in their stances on things. Their stance on one issue may determine their stance on a separate but unrelated issue. Um, Give me 1 second. I left something on. So it's this weird thing with our two-party system. You know, your stance on one particular issue has this weird arbitrary determinative effect on your stance on another issue that is totally unrelated to that one. And it's because parties just kind of fall into tracks of thinking whereby they're no longer reasoning on an issue by issue basis, rather reasoning on a party affiliation basis. But Jesse Ventura is I encourage you to look him up. Yeah, I mean, he's your typical, he's an ex-pro wrestler, ex-governor of Minnesota. But if you're interested in what a TI presidential candidate might look like, you would need to go look at him because he's a pretty good example of either an ISTP or an ESTP. Probably not either an INTP or an ENTP, but most certainly I would say definitely an ISTP or an ESTP. Very much TI valuing. If he's at least TI instrumental, if not TI absolute valuing. So I would look at him, and if you'd probably find yourself titillated by some of his positions on things if you're a TI, if you're a fellow TI user. Now, my point in this video is, we have this idea where voting becomes a kind of strategy, right? And it's essentially voting becomes we vote strategically rather than conscientiously. We vote practically rather than in principle. We vote in a utilitarian way rather than a strictly logical or principled or conscientious way. And we vote so that we choose the lesser of two evils to ensure that the worse of those two evils does not gain power. And ultimately, I like the idea that the lesser of two evils is still evil, and that even by choosing the lesser of two evils, you're still choosing evil. And so this is just, I just feel it's extremely important with the way things are going policy-wise, that there is some necessity, not for a revolution, but for a break with not any kind of chaotic revolution, but a structured, civilized revolution, moving away from our two-party binary choice system that we have in place toward maybe independent candidates who are willing to reason on an issue-by-issue basis, consider evidence, consider the word of experts, to not allow their stances on other issues determine their stances on separate, unrelated issues, to reason case by case, and to find the optimal solution in a larger utilitarian framework. And I think it's desperately important then that we do start to try to break away and find alternatives to the two-party mess. And whether or not it's, I fully believe that a stable evil is far worse than a chaotic good. And that even if it would be somewhat more difficult for us to think through the issues and to come up with policy positions and solutions, that's not a reason to maintain a status quo that clearly is not working and doesn't make any sense, and at least admits to not making sense or trying to make sense at all by essentially taking positions on things as politicians based on what enhances electability rather than what's right, what's ethical, what's logical. And I feel like most politicians within this system, particularly with Republicans and Democrats, I mean, the primary focus is on electability rather than ethics and logic and evidence. And that's deeply troubling and a deeply bad thing. It maintains, well, I mean, I'm not going to take too staunch a position on what kinds of, I mean, you'll find some political commentators just saying, oh, it leads to the fall of civilization, or making some dramatic statement like that. I wouldn't say any of that. I just say that it's less optimal, and that it's so anyway. But people say this all the time. And when I was in high school, I had my own phase of libertarianism. I'm no longer a libertarian, although I may have some anarchist strains in my thought, or some sort of decentralization principle that is guiding a lot of my political thought and feeling right now, a lot of my political feelings about things. It's just another phase that I'm going through. But with my libertarian strain in high school, if I said I was voting for Ron Paul, or I was voting for whatever the libertarian option was at the time, I was just told, well, that's stupid. By doing that, you waste your vote. You only ensure that the Democrats win. And so the idea is that to vote for a third party, and a third party independent or otherwise affiliated candidate, a third way is to waste your vote, right? And people will simply then say, oh, well, I don't want to do, I mean, we have this, okay, good. Yeah, I don't want to waste my vote. I don't want to ensure that the greater of the two evils wins. So I'm going to vote for the lesser of the two evils, and then we'll just do it that way. And we'll hope that the changes and the optimization and the policy optimizations that we desire will ultimately just kind of come about, right? By preserving that status quo, by choosing the lesser of the two evils. But again, to choose the lesser of the two evils is still to choose evil. The lesser of two evils is not a good, it's still evil. And I don't like throwing around the terms good and evil. I'm just simply using the terms within that conventional aphorism, the lesser of two evils. Oh, it's not an aphorism. Within that conventional like proverb, you should choose the lesser of the two evils. Here's the thing. I mean, what people don't consider is that when you choose, as the title of the video suggests, when you choose to not waste your vote, you actually end up wasting an entire election, right? Again, when you choose to not waste your vote, you're wasting an entire election, right? So ultimately, what's worse, right? And my reasoning, what I'm saying is this: by not wasting your vote, you do ensure you cast your vote for the lesser of two evils. You ensure that the better of the two evils wins. But ultimately, the election still goes because it goes to the lesser evil, which is still an evil, right? And yes, and so yeah, and so by choosing to not waste or by choosing to not waste your vote, you ultimately end up wasting an entire election. So what's worse? I mean, there is some sort of it's just the idea the thinking is that people should think through the issues independently. They should not take party. The problem is that people are not reasoning issue by issue. They're not really considering evidence. They're not really considering any kind of larger strategy. They're not considering any kind of political ethics. They're not considering anything but party affiliation, in the hope that the party's stances on particular things, what would be the word for it? Their particular carousel of positions and stances will then produce a government that is better than the government that would be produced by the alternative evil. And this is a bad assumption. We shouldn't vote via affiliation. We shouldn't vote with our affiliation. We should vote with our conscience. We should vote on the side of evidence, on the side of logic, on the side of our own independent thinking about things. And that is the thing, right? I mean, democracy. I was having a conversation with a friend in the past, and we were like, well, why can't we have a monarchy? Wouldn't that bypass all the inefficiency of a democracy, right? The gridlock politics, all of that. Would that not enable us to bypass all that shit? And I was going to say, pardon my French, but it's English, so pardon my English. Would it not be better to bypass all of the gridlock politics and then just elect a monarch, a chief executive that can just do whatever the fuck just make the decisions for us? Well, we were entertaining that possibility, and yeah, from an efficiency perspective, that seems more optimal. But from a ethical perspective, a political ethical perspective, it's suboptimal, because ultimately what democracy is accountability, right? It's about keeping those in authority in check, right? And keeping the opinions and the doctrines and the ideas and the particular positions of these authorities, which they can enforce with power, with political power, with real political power. Democracy is about accountability. It's about ensuring that people are voting with their conscience. They are voting with independent thought. They are voting with concern for logic and evidence and a larger picture, because that is a direct check against the groupthink that authority structures inherently want to enforce. So democracy is about accountability, but when we only vote with our affiliation rather than with our conscience, then we are robbing democracy of its purpose, which is to keep authority accountable. We simply allow a status quo kind of authority to exist to establish their positions in law and enforce those particular positions, instead of doing what a good Democrat or a good democratic a voter in a democratic society would do, which would be to think independently as they do, with their own conscience, their own ideas, their own concern with evidence, and their own weighing of the probabilities of what's better in terms of policy. That is the immediate check against the groupthink that authority wants to enforce, which is why democracy exists, to keep those in power accountable. So ultimately, think of it this way: by not wasting your vote, you end up just wasting an election. You waste an entire election, and you preserve an evil that is stable when you could choose a good that, even if somewhat more chaotic, would still be a good rather than an evil. It's simply that people, it's just that, so ultimately it's not, we do have to, I think that the solution in some sense is to imagine the ideal of a new kind of politician, or a third way, where it's not about, your affiliation anymore, right? It has nothing to do with that. It's not about the gridlock type of thinking on issues that come with over identification within a party, with a party affiliation, right? Independent candidates, you'll notice, are far more likely, like Jesse Ventura, to just say, to, in the same breath, say that they support the conservative issue of expanded gun rights and the liberal issue of universal basic income. That's refreshing, because they're able to just judge the issues in of themselves and not in relation to each other, with respect to how the relationships between those issues enhance or diminish electability. So this is perhaps even the solution, I mean, and so if you are looking for a TI candidate, because I feel like most of the candidates this is the INTP stream, so you feel like most of the candidates that you find are probably like FE or TE, which are the dominant functions operating in the minds of most politicians. If you want a good alternativism, like a TI candidate, you could look at Jesse Ventura and see what you think about him. I disregard all of his fascination with the conspiracy theories, and just pay attention to his ideas. And I don't see why. This is the weird thing. It's like conspiracy theories. I don't even know. Don't even call them conspiracy theories. Just call them theories, because that's really what they are. They're simply a consensus questioning kind of theory, and it basically they simply defy the basic human impulse to reason by consensus, to seek the convenience of agreement with everyone else to preserve social harmony, where in reality what we really should be trying to do is get to the bottom of things logically, irrespective of trying to preserve any kind of social harmony. So, and that's, I guess, my own TI talking, and if I don't know. So my type is irrelevant here. I do try my best to apply TI logic to political issues and really any issue, but he's a candidate that may be able to do that, with a little bit more star power than I ever could. And he's a candidate that definitely has the FE charisma and charm, but it's all very much backed up with good TI reasoning, and good TE reasoning as well. It's refreshing to see a candidate who's not just going to be a mouthpiece or a puppet for some party affiliation complex they have in their heads, but rather are willing, or at least daring enough, to take positions on issues that are not gridlocked, and or somehow that are willing to reason issue by issue rather than by party affiliation. So yeah, I would encourage you to look him up. Joe Rogan did a podcast with him, which is a very good interview with him. Not so much an interview as an interaction. So you'd enjoy that tremendously. Hopefully you enjoy the concepts in this video, but really none of this was about Jesse Ventura or any of that. The basic idea that I have to present is this: by not wasting your vote, you waste an entire election. What's worse? Thank you for watching.